Hi everybody and welcome to PulseCon 2022. Thanks for joining us today. I'm with a man who really needs no introduction, but Larry Hama is here, the legend himself, writer of G.I. Joe, a real American hero since 1982, and remarkably coming up on issue number 300, quite a milestone in the comic book world, to say the least. And just before I get any further into the interview, I just wanted to say, Larry, congratulations from myself and everyone here at Hasbro for your recent induction into the Eisner Hall of Fame. We all know that that was both well-deserved and, even more importantly, well-earned. So congratulations on that.
Well, thank you. I was pretty flabbergasted. Never a million years thought I'd get an Eisner, but that's besides the point.
Well, we all knew it, and we were just glad to see it finally happen. So it's definitely a great honor. So and none more deserving than you are. So congrats again. So I'll just get into some questions for you, if you don't mind, Larry. I think the first one, and obviously you've had hundreds of interviews over the years, and I'm sure you've heard quite a few of these over the years as well, and answered them ad infinitum. But since we probably have some new fans on the show today, I figured maybe we could just start with a little bit about yourself and how you got into writing G.I. Joe comics back in 1982.
Well, what happened was it's quite a convoluted story. I mean, I was a full editor at Marvel. I was editing Crazy magazine at the time. I had been an editor at DC, and then I went over to Marvel. And I basically been in the comic book business since the late 60s. Sold my first cartoon to Castle of Frankenstein in 1966, thereabouts. But I couldn't get any writing work. No editor at Marvel would let me write anything. And I was able to prove to the editor-in-chief that I had gone to every editor at Marvel and asked for writing work, and couldn't get any. So he gave me dispensation to write for other companies while I was a full editor at Marvel, which was sort of unheard of then and unheard of today. And then Hasbro came to Marvel, and they wanted a comic book based on their toy line, G.I. Joe. Now, you have to understand that in 1982, within the comic book community, toy licensed books were considered pretty much the bottom of the barrel. They were, the licensing fee came right off the top of the page rate. So they weren't paying, top rates for licensed comics of any sort. So no A-list or even B-list writers or artists would deign to do a licensed comic. But I really wanted to get my foot in the door writing. So the editor-in-chief went to pretty much, well, he went to all the contract writers, and they all turned it down. Then he went to all the non-contract writers, and they all turned it down. So then he started going to each editorial office, and he asked each editor and assistant editor, and they all turned it down. And he was going from office to office in order. And my office was the last office on the row. And he came in and he offered it to me, and I said, sure, I'll do it. And I said this 1,000 times, but if he had been offering me Barbie, I would have taken Barbie, or My Little Pony for that matter. I didn't have a great burning desire to work on a military comic. I basically got into the business because I wanted to do funny animals, but nobody was buying funny animals at the time. So I did what was around, which was superheroes. And so that's how I ended up with G.I. Joe. And on doing the first issue, I had like an extreme panic attack because as soon as I, finished writing that first issue, I sat back and I said, my God, I haven't got a clue as to what comes next. I thought, oh my God, I've shot my entire wad. And that feeling never went away. With every single issue I wrote, to this day, I feel like I'm jumping in the deep end of the pool and trying to swim my way back to the shallow end.
Well, as somebody who's been overseeing Hasbro's comics for the last 16 years now, I have to say you make it look easy, even if you say that you're always jumping in the deep end. And certainly we're all lucky that ended up being your office that he came into at the end of the day, because obviously the rest of it's history. Like I said, 300 issues is an amazing feat. And, just drawing a little bit upon that, and what you said about licensed comics, and certainly I know a little bit about that time frame. I would say that probably a comic based on a toy line, maybe you expected it to go, I don't know, 5 or 6 issues, maybe 12 at the most. What were your thoughts in terms of getting, at the most, yeah. What were your thoughts on, getting to 155, let alone 300?
Well, because, comics, licensed comics didn't really last that long in those days. And even toy lines didn't last. I mean, the given wisdom in the toy industry in 1982 was that a toy line lasted maybe 3 years if you were really lucky. And when you got to the 3-year point, everybody started to get nervous because nobody wanted to get stuck with warehouses full of, all these things that everyone thought, oh, these are going to go on forever. and when they died this grisly death. And, everybody was stuck with all this inventory that they, it's still sitting there rotting, So, when they made that momentous decision to go to go for the 4th year, that was a really big surprise to everybody. And technically speaking, it was sort of a risk because they really didn't know. But, that was a turnover point. And from then on, it was like, oh, okay, this is a thing now,
Right. So thinking of that and getting to issue 300, I mean, obviously a lot of that has to do with your skill as a writing and your ability as a storyteller to really keep people engaged for such a long period of time, coming back month after month to read the comics. But I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on the brand, having worked with it for so long. What other attributes of G.I. Joe do you think keeps people so engaged for all these years? I mean, we're now in the 40th anniversary of the Real American Hero storyline. Just curious your thoughts about what it is that really resonates with people when it comes to G.I. Joe.
I don't think it has anything to do with a storyline, because realistically, nobody ever remembers a plot. You go back to see the next one because you like those characters and you want to spend time with those characters, and that's my feeling about G.I. Joe, that I really tried to nail the characters and make them really consistent and, give them, something to identify with, so that you got pulled into the dramaturgy by the strength of the characters. and wanted to spend more time with them. And I think that's all there is to it. I pretty much base most of the characters on people I know, um, because that's one way to keep it really consistent, and I can keep it all straight. Um, the vaguer you make a character, you know, it doesn't have the legs anymore. You got to make that character stand up and walk around in his own shoes, and people can sense that, and you have to believe in the character yourself. It's what we used to call the Tinkerbell syndrome. That Barry, who created Peter Pan, you know,
Hmm.
um, said that great line about, if every time somebody stops believing in fairies, one of them drops dead someplace. So, um, so you have to keep the fairies alive, you know? And the only way to do that is to believe in them, you know. Um,
Hmm.
and once you go beyond that point of, like, believing in the character, and you're just using the character as a device or whatever, you know, um, I think the audience can sense that, and they know that it's just a puppet being uh, choreographed. And choreography, is what sells kung fu movies. you,
Right.
you go to see a kung fu movie, for the choreography. Again, you're not thinking, oh, this is going to be a great plot. You're going to like the main character, and there's going to be a lot of great choreography, and in the end, he dies. So, there's no surprise. Um, so the pleasure then comes in how well all the stuff is executed. You know, this is what worked in Kabuki also. You know, or a lot of Asian dramaturgy is like that. People know exactly what the story is going to be. You
Hmm.
know, but it's how the story is told that's important, and I think I tried to make that work with GI Joe.
Well, and you were very successful at that, without a doubt. And I'm really interested in what you've been saying about character and how important the characters themselves are to the storytelling and to the longevity of the brand. And one of the things that I read, you had written once or said once in an interview, that in addition to the file cards, the original file cards that you created for some of the GI Joe action figures back in the early '80s, that you had also created some fairly detailed psychological profiles of some of the characters, which I found fascinating to go that in depth into particular characters, especially characters that are based on what were at the time only plastic toys. I was curious if you had any. I was curious if you had any memories of, or particular characters that you would share, maybe some of the psychological insights that you had of what their characterizations were like from those profiles.
I don't know if how specific I can get about that, but I did write a short psychological profile for each character that was supposedly written by a fictitious shrink.
Mm.
Um, but I think more importantly, I also included a paragraph that was a peer assessment report that was another one of the characters talking about that character in
Mm.
the character's voice. So that helped me in a lot of ways, that it gave voice to these other characters, and it gave me a window into seeing how this specific character was viewed by the other characters. And that adds to the verisimilitude. That that makes the world much more solid when you can understand how the characters are relating to each other and the cause of that relationship.
That's great. Um, and this is kind of also referring back to something you said a little bit earlier about, how nervous you were after finishing issue 1 and what to do next. And, you're obviously famous for saying that when you're writing page 3, you don't necessarily know what's going to happen on page 6, and you've never started a comic knowing what was going to happen at the end of that particular comic, which obviously really lends a lot to the mystery and the excitement. And if you don't know exactly what's going to happen, obviously the reader's not going to be able to sort of, you're not going to signal that, so the reader's not going to pick up on it. What I'm curious to know, though, is did you ever find yourself backed into a corner because of working that way? Did you ever find that to be like, uh-oh, what do I do now? Because I got myself into this situation from not knowing, and now the story's taking me where it wants to go, maybe as opposed to where you wanted it to go? Or just curious if you had any examples of a time when that was really challenging for you in terms of a storytelling process.
Well, sure, but I think the amazing thing is that if you're really invested in characters, you're totally willing to suspend disbelief and let some things that would be in other situations totally egregious. You just let it pass. I mean, there was one issue of GI Joe where I had all the bad guys, all the Cobra hierarchy, sinking into quicksand on the last page. when that issue came out, I remember like Chris Claremont came storming into my office and he slammed the issue down on my desk and he said, "Wait a minute, how can you have all the villains sinking into quicksand on the last page of this comic? How are you going to get them out of that?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." He says, "You don't know?" And I said, "On the first page of the next issue, they're just going to be out of the quicksand. Why do you need to know how they got out?" And nobody ever questioned it. That's at the point I realized, oh, I may be onto something here. And a lot of people refuse to believe that I have no idea what's on page 5 until I get to page 4. But I'll tell you exactly what happened when I was doing issue 21, the silent issue, which I had to do a silent issue because we needed to save the whole week it took to get lettering because the thing was so late. I got halfway through the book, and there was a panel where I realized that both Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow had torn their right sleeve, right here in the forearm. And I thought, what can I do with that? And then I remembered that years before, when I had drawn Iron Fist, I had created a character named Lei Kung the Thunderer, who had a breastplate it was a circular breastplate with an I Ching hexagram on it, And I remembered, oh, it was a really cool looking design, but because I chose an arbitrary hexagram, I could never remember the order of the broken and solid lines. And I would always have to look it back up. So I thought, okay, I'll use a hexagram, but I'll use one that I can remember, which is alternating broken and solid lines with the broken line at the top. And so I gave them both this hexagram tattoo. At that point, I had no idea what that tattoo meant, nor why they both had it. I had to come up with all of that 5 issues later in number 26 with the origin issue. But that's how these things happen. you sometimes by happenstance you come across a situation where, oh, I can exploit this visual to some degree, and you jump on it. Um, and that sort of uncertainty thing, um, I think really helps. And like I said before, if I don't know what's going to happen at the end, it's impossible for me to telegraph it. So I think that really works.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to hear that method, and to think that, in a sense, happenstance was the birthplace of two of what might be the most iconic characters in all of G.I. Joe lore, and possibly overall comics in a lot of ways. So it's remarkable. And I also think what is fascinating too about your style is, I think it seems to give a lot of credit to the reader too. I think oftentimes we feel like we have to put in a lot of exposition and a lot of explanation to bring readers along with us, and yet I think your writing style really proves that readers are sophisticated enough to pick up on the nuance and know what's important and what's not. And if they don't need to know how they got out of the quicksand, then they move on. So it's great, great insight into the narrative flow.
Well, I think what's more important than like plot and narrative is the characters. I think what's important is that the characters have a moral center of some sort. I mean, even the bad guys. I mean, Destro has a moral center. There's things that he won't do. Even the Baroness has that. The one who doesn't have a moral center probably is Cobra Commander. He's totally.
Yeah,
and
something not quite wired right up there.
Yeah, but that's what we like about him. He's completely over the top in that. I mean, he's over the top in that way, in the same way that like the Sabretooth character is way over the top, in the X-Men universe. He's you can't jump the shark with either of those characters. There's nothing that you could have them do that people go, oh wait, that's too far. No.
Right.
But the thing about having the moral center for the characters, and from the Joe viewpoint, is that they really play to the fantasy about loyalty, and to a 10-year-old kid, that's a powerful fantasy, because by the time you're 10, you've already been betrayed a bunch of times. So the fantasy about having a group of friends that would always stick up for you, and and if you were in trouble, come and get you out of trouble, and are that steadfast, and represent some sort of fairness in a totally unfair world. That's a very powerful fantasy, and something you can really latch on to.
Yeah, definitely. So speaking of characters, you just mentioned Destro, Cobra Commander. Are there particular characters that you really enjoy writing as opposed to others, or conversely really find it challenging to write in terms of getting those characterizations consistent and down and keeping them interesting, etc.?
Well, yeah, but I like the character interplay between, let's say, Cobra Commander, Destro, Baroness, and Zartan. There's this odd frisson between these characters. They in the way they relate to each other, they're like abrading each other. It's like and that creates a good story points. With the Joes, you know, it's more about, you know, playing with those fantasies of loyalty and, you know, going for specifically going for hitting people in the feels. You know, um, that doesn't happen by accident. You have to, uh, you know, delve into those character points and figure out a way to make it relevant to the story and to make it naturalistic to the character. Because if you violate any of that, you know, the fantasy evaporates.
This might be a difficult question to answer based on the way that you write the GI Joe comics, but I was curious if there's ever been a story in the back of your mind that you've always wanted to tell with the GI Joe characters and either didn't because you thought maybe Hasbro would step in the way, or if it was just that the way you're writing the comics took you in a different direction. But is there sort of a story in the back of your mind that I'd love someday to tell this story about these characters in G.I. Joe doing this thing or this adventure, something of that nature?
Nope. Never went to my mind.
I had a feeling that was going to be the answer, but you know, I figured I might just get the big moment, but clearly not. That's
you know, I keep saying I literally just do it, you know, story by story. I mean,
story by story. Yep.
at 155 issues at Marvel, there wasn't a single coming attraction blurb because nobody knew what was going to be in the next issue.
That's great. That's great.
You know, I like to surprise myself, you know, and there's no better feeling than that, you know, sitting there and having that aha moment, you know, where it all sort of comes together and you go, oh, wait, this is like, you know, I may not have planned this, but this is working out pretty nicely.
Well, without any spoilers or anything of that nature to too much of an extent, is there anything you can tell us about issue 300?
Let's just say that it ends in one heck of a cliffhanger. and I have no idea how to get them out of it. So this is the quicksand, you know, on a much grander scale. It's the ultimate quicksand ending, yeah. So
excellent. Just moving away a little bit from G.I. Joe specifically, just curious, Larry, you've been obviously in the comic book business for quite a while. You've seen all the changes. Certainly recently the business has been through a lot of changes. Do you have any thoughts or advice for anybody that was looking to break into comic book writing or creating, et cetera, at this point? Just any thoughts about, I don't know, how you feel like you've succeeded? And I know a lot of it, what you said, has been, you know, some of it was serendipity and luck, but obviously a lot of it is skill and perseverance. Just curious if you had any just general insights in that regard.
Well, I think the industry has changed completely since, you know, it's just not the same, you know. I mean, you know, back then it was very much like a mom and pop store, you know, and now it's so corporate. But you know, when I first started at Marvel, I mean, it was like an open house. You know, people could just, you know, like freelancers could come in and like go sit in your office. They would come sit in my office, and then they would walk down the hall to the next office, and you know, spend the entire day just going from office to office, and you know, and there were places like Continuity, Neil Adams' studio, that there were sort of like an open atelier. You know, people, you know, he was right there within 5 blocks of both companies, and all the artists and writers and whatever could go there and get a free cup of coffee and hang out and, shoot the breeze, and there was this incredible feeling of sense of community, that it was like a small town. Everybody knew each other. Um, I don't think that exists anymore. I mean, there may be some of that going on at like the cons. I mean, if you go to San Diego and New York and Chicago and the big Heroes Con and Dragon and all the other big venues, then you're part of that community, and you get to know all those people, and you belong to that. But back then it was much smaller. You had real sort of apprenticeship things going on where I got my start working for Wally Wood. Howie Chaykin worked for Gil Kane. You know you were able to like apprentice and learn the ropes from the best there were, you know, and that I don't think that exists anymore. I mean, but now you have the internet, people can show you how they do it, like,
Right.
you know, live on the computer. But back then it was a whole different story. Like Wally Wood used to tell this great story about when he first worked for Milton Caniff. He was Milton Caniff's assistant, and Caniff went to lunch one day, and he left the young Wally Wood in the studio, and he said, "Okay, while I'm at lunch, you finish these panels and put in all the explosions." And and Woody thought, "Oh, I know how to do Milton Caniff explosions. I've been studying them all my life." So he spent the entire lunch hour meticulously, penciling every little bit of these explosions, tightly with a pencil, and then inking it, filling in the blacks, and leaving, the white specks and stuff. And Caniff comes back from lunch. The master, he looks at the pages. He says, "Oh, these really suck." and he takes out a fresh piece of board, and he takes the brush and he dips the brush into inkwell, and he goes, makes this big black blotch, and he blows on it to dry it, picks up a single edge razor blade and goes screech, 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 screech. And that was it. He did this beautiful explosion, in like 3.5 seconds.
Wow.
And Woody was saying, I could have stared at those explosions for 20 years and not been able to figure out that's how it had happened. And so that was the importance of that actually personally passing on the lore and the skill sets. And it's a great story too. So.
Yes,
What can you say?
It is. Oh. Well, thank you, Larry. I really appreciate your time today. I do have just one last question for you, and I'll leave it to you how you'd like to answer this. But I know that the next stage of our G.I. Joe comics are a little bit shrouded in mystery, and we haven't really made any announcements. But I sort of have this feeling that we might not have seen the last of Larry Hama and G.I. Joe comic books. Do you have any insights on that?
Am I allowed to say anything?
Well, you could maybe hint at something.
Well,
we'd all love to hear if you're still interested.
Well, tomorrow I have to start figuring out how to get these guys out of this quicksand. So you could say I'm already started on it. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. That's really exciting, and
Yeah.
I'm certainly looking forward to continuing to work with you, Larry. It's been a real pleasure these last 16 or so years. Certainly a dream come true for me. I thank you for all the dedication and hard work that you've put into this. Issue 300 is a remarkable milestone. So congratulations on that as well, and thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it at this end also. So what can I say?
Great. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. That was the amazing Larry Hama. Hope you guys got to get a little bit of insight into how he thinks and how he creates and how he brings us these amazing G.I. Joe comics for all these years, and hopefully for more years to come. Thanks again. Bye.